Okay, so I'm going to assume again that nobody objects to starting a little early, right? Seeing as you're both here habitually early, it means we can always leave a little early too, so. Okay, so I got two things for you before we get started. The first is a bibliography, giving you a list of the texts that I consulted for today. Most of these you'll see are directly connected to the use J.R.R. Tolkien makes of the material we're going to be talking about today. So this is something you should kind of put aside for when you are ready to write the longer paper at the end of the term. I also have for you a set of directions for the response papers. The first is going to be Friday. It's the same as for the Britlit 2 class, so you've already got that. You already know what to do. But essentially what I want you to do is choose some particular quote from the week's reading. So for this week, it could be any of these Exeter book poems that we're looking at, or it could be something from the first half of Beowulf. You're going to take a passage from that, copy at the top of the page, and you're going to do a close reading of the passage and attempt to historically contextualize it as well. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, we did that for Worldlet.
Okay, yeah. So just look over the directions. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'm happy to look over your work for you if you want to show me something before you turn it in. Again, provided I get it with at least 24 hours before it's due.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about these poems. What did you guys think of this?
It was a little different from what I was expecting. I was thinking we were going to start with like something that would be culturally in the same grounds as like communities and stuff, but this is more having to do with exiles.
Yeah. In particular, the two elegies, right, are very much concerned with the notion of exile, and actually that is connected to the idea of community. And the importance of community in Anglo-Saxon culture. Was there anything else about these poems that surprised you, either the elegies or the riddles?
Both of them dealt with the loss of your lord and then trying to move on after that.
Yeah. The importance of that lord-thane relationship, right? Yeah. The lord and his men. There's a strong reciprocal bond. Yeah. What were you going to say?
With the riddles, it was all, for me, this question was, how do they speak? Because each item would like describe itself, its usefulness to man, and how it affected man. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, it's all about it's about giving an inanimate object a voice, right? So that is a literary trope called prosopopeia. Say that 3 times fast while drunk.
Oh, that's one of my words for cognitive psych.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
You'll get lucky to get out on a peed out of me.
Just so long as you know what it means and recognize it when you see it, right? So prosopopeia, is giving a voice to an inanimate object. Or, well, I mean, some of these are animals, so to an inanimate or an otherwise voiceless object or a creature. Did you find any of the riddles and their solutions particularly surprising?
The first one, it talked about, there's a few of them. A lot of them had to do with, I think a lot of them said the word keel, which I know is a part of a boat.
Yeah.
But for the first riddle, I think the very first one, it was a swan.
Yeah.
And now swan, that does make tracks, or it doesn't leave tracks, but it makes tracks on water. So I was like, okay, maybe it has to do with the boat, has to do with, and there's 4 asterisks, so I think, okay, you know what, it's definitely got to be a boat. You go to the back, it's a swan. It's like, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, like all of these are extended metaphors of some kind, right? The idea is to make it look like something else, but to kind of point out an unexpected similarity between the two things. So, one of my personal favorites is number 27 on page 73. Men are fond of me. I am found everywhere, brought in from the woods and the beetling cliffs, from down and from dale. In the daylight, wings raised me aloft, then into a roof's shade swung me in sweetly. Sweltered then by men in a bath, I am a binder now, soon a thrasher, a thrower next. I'll put an old fellow flat on the ground. A man who tries to take me on, tests my strength, soon finds out, if his silly plan doesn't pall on him, that it is his back that will hit the dust. Loud in words, he has lost control of his hands and feet, and his head doesn't work. His strength is gone. Guess my name, who have such mastery of men on earth, that I knock them about in broad daylight. So what does it sound like the poem is talking about?
Alcohol.
Yeah, the answer is mead, right? It's an alcoholic drink, right? But it's described in terms of a wrestler, right?
Yeah.
He was able to knock an old man on his back. A lot of the riddles are also a little bit filthy, right? Yeah, there are a lot of kind of like double entendres in here, like the one about the onion and the one about the key.
Yeah, the whole time with the onion, I was thinking, okay, that's a rose, and then I go all the way to that. Okay, onion.
Yep.
And yeah, the key. That one's, you come up with that one.
Yeah, both of those they try to guide you to thinking essentially the answer is a penis, right? But it's not. It's an onion in the first one, and then it's a key in the second. But again, they're pointing out particular similarities, right? That the key is used to fill the same hole repeatedly, right, and so on and so forth, right? So what we see here is that the Anglo-Saxons were fond of dirty little jokes. Now, before we go much further with this material, I want to note a little bit about where it comes from, right? So all of the texts that we read for today are contained in a book that is today known as the Exeter Book. Because since the 11th century, it has been kept at Exeter Cathedral. The Exeter Book is the largest compendium of Anglo-Saxon poetry that survives. So in addition to elegies like The Wanderer and the Seafarer, it includes religious poems, a couple of dream vision poems, a couple of heroic poems, and then 2 sets of riddles. The first 60 riddles are blocked together, the first 60 or so, and then the next 60 to 100 are also blocked. Plus there are a couple interspersed between other poems, right? So they're not all a continuous block. And I think it would probably help our understanding if we know a little bit about medieval bookmaking. Now I know Nick, you've taken Brit Lit 1, have you?
No, but I'm a history nerd.
Okay, so what do you guys know about medieval bookmaking, if anything?
It was usually done by hand, and it usually took years to complete one book.
Yeah.
And only monks could do it.
Yeah, literacy rates were typically pretty low, right? So the number of people who could read or write was often limited to specific churchmen, right? Not even all priests were able really to read and write all that well.
They were super heavy because they were made from vellum.
Yes, they're usually bound in vellum or parchment, which is calfskin or sheepskin, right? Which are materials that require much more effort to make than contemporary wood pulp paper, right? Wood is cheap and freely available, and you don't have to raise the animal and feed it, right? It doesn't require a tanning process or a scraping process to get it ready to put writing on it. And inks were also very expensive, right? They're made from various crushed insects or precious stones, various plant-based dyes. So the more colors you see in a particular book, the more the person who commissioned it probably had to pay for it, right? You also had to pay extra if you wanted illuminations in the margins, right? If you wanted any illustrations, that was going to be extra because you had to pay a skilled or semi-skilled artist. And because a single book was so expensive, it's rare that we find a medieval book that's devoted to a single text, right? Structures like the Exeter book are much, much more common, where you've got a multitude of texts sandwiched together between the covers because you don't want to waste a single page, right? Because you paid through the friggin' nose for this thing. What this means also is that books are a big status symbol in the Middle Ages, even if you can't read them, right? The fact that you can afford a beautifully produced book indicates that you are a person of some stature. Like, how many, have either of you seen Anchorman?
Yeah. I've seen bits and pieces.
Okay, if you see, there's the part of the beginning where Ron Burgundy is trying to explain to Veronica Corningstone what a big important man he is. And he says, I'm a very important man, I own many leather-bound books, right? Like, we still do that, or we still use books as a kind of status signaling. But a lot of that originates back, from the time when books were incredibly expensive, right? These were luxury items. So this particular book was produced sometime in the late 10th century. Historians don't agree on a date, but it's sometime between the year 960 and the year 1000. And it ended up in Exeter as part of the collection of a bishop by the name of Leofric, who died in 1075 and willed his books, including this one, to the monastery from which the cathedral eventually developed, right? So by the time this is written down, by the time these poems are written down, their cultural moment is largely past, right? The culture that they describe is one that's already more or less gone and has been thoroughly Christianized. So you've probably noticed, particularly in The Wanderer and the Seafarer, there's a bit of a tension there between, the sort of Christian hope for salvation and the kind of hopelessness of the wanderer and the exile, right? So let's take a closer look at these two poems first, and then we'll dig into the riddles a little bit more. So, what's an elegy? Do you guys know what an elegy is?
A sorrowful poem. That's what I got from it.
Yeah.
Both of them were, they were these long, they weren't epic poems.
Yeah.
But they were long enough poems, and they were both very sad.
Yeah.
They're both, in The Wanderer, he's discussing, losing his Lord and how that's affected him. And the Seafarer, he's comparing, his life as being a sailor to that of the man who's lived on land.
Right. Yeah, I think they both use that particular metaphor, right, of the land life versus the sea life, right? So I want to unpack that a little bit in a minute. I think you're on the right track with what an elegy is. So elegy is actually a term that comes to us from Greek and Roman poetry. So if the Anglo-Saxons had a name for this kind of poem, we don't know what it would be. It's clear that there is a kind of consistent genre here because there are a lot of poems in this type in various Anglo-Saxon codexes. But we don't know what their name for it would have been if they had one. So we tend to apply this Greco-Roman name to it. I think it comes originally from Greek. The name comes originally from Greek. because it's similar to what the Greeks and Romans meant by an elegy. So the Greek or Roman elegy was a poem about the transitory nature of things and a kind of lament for changing times. And one of the key features of the elegy, both the Greco-Roman elegy and the Anglo-Saxon elegy, is that it tends to involve a comparison between the present and the past, in which the past is almost always better than the present. Right, where you were, or at least where you imagine you were, is better than where you are. Right? There are no lords like there were back in the glory days. Warriors today are small and petty, so on and so forth, right? So, let's look a little bit at the social context in which this is happening. So Anglo-Saxon communities were exceptionally tight. Now this is in part because life was dangerous, right? Life was dangerous, farming was difficult. The things you needed to do to survive required a good deal of cooperation. So these kinship bonds, in fact, the Anglo-Saxon word for community is kin, which we can recognize as the root of our word kin. And the kin pretty much did everything together. They ate together, they drank together, they fought together, they hunted, they farmed together, right? And the most important job that the Anglo-Saxon lord had was to distribute resources in the community. So, our word lord comes from the word hlaford, which is a contraction of hlaford, which means literally the guardian of the loaf, right? The guardian of the bread. So the Lord is the guardian of the bread. And he shares it out at night when everybody gathers in the hall. Now he's also expected to give gifts to keep his thanes, his warriors, loyal, right? As long as the Lord is generous and is giving gifts, often in the forms of things like, do you guys know what a torque is?
Bracelet.
Yeah, except it goes around your neck.
Around
Yeah, a torque is a bracelet, essentially a bracelet that goes around your neck, right?
Yeah.
Arm rings, things like that. These were very common kind of treasures or spoils that were given out. Wearable wealth was common. So the Lord also often became known as the ring giver. And a generous Lord could be assured of finding loyal followers. But that generosity was expected to be repaid. Right? So if the Lord goes into battle, you are expected then to fight for him and to fight to the death. In return, he is answerable for your conduct. Right? If you ally yourself with the Lord. He is expected to protect and shelter you, to feed you and give you gifts. And he's responsible for any crimes that you commit while in his service, or that you committed before you were in his service. So what then does this suggest about the situation of the exile? Why is the situation of the exile or the last survivor so fraught then?
You can't join another community because no Lord wants his past at the same as his past, or the other Lord's past. Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody's going to take on an unknown man, right? If you're a stranger, odds are a Lord isn't going to want to take a risk on you because he's responsible for you. So if it turns out you're a criminal on the run, then he has to deal with that shit if he takes you into his service, right?
And then you also don't have that you don't have that safety.
Exactly.
You don't have that fellowship.
Yeah, you don't have that safety, you don't have that fellowship, and you can't get it, right? Now, this is all related to another Germanic concept. Like the way you deal with this then is related to another Germanic cultural concept that's called weird, or weird. Now, were you able to, do either of you know, were we able to infer from context what weird means?
I kind of substituted the word as life when I was reading it. It almost had the same meaning.
Yeah, it's you're on the right track. Weird has more to, like, it does have to do with your life, but specifically, weird is fate. And this is one of those places where the Germanic heroic culture and Christianity bump up against each other, right, and are in friction with one another. The notion in Germanic society that your fate is set, there's nothing you can do to fight it, so the best thing you can do is bear up under circumstances as best you can, right? There is no salvation. The world is going to end anyway. There's nothing you can do to stop it. So the best thing you can do is hold up against those forces as best you can. You know, hence the image of the exile being like a man tossed about on the waves, right? Being tossed about by weird, being tossed about by fate. So that's where, like, the tension in these poems, right, come from. Some of it probably being older content on which Christian ideas are then overwritten at a later point in the poem's development, right? So let's dig into The Wanderer a little bit and see what we can do with this. All right, so let's go to page 48. And we see that tension immediately right at the very beginning of The Wanderer, right? Can I get somebody to read this first paragraph? Yeah, Ashley, go ahead.
Who liveth alone longeth for mercy, maker's mercy. Though he must traverse tracts of sea, sick at heart, trouble with ice-cold waters, the ways of exile, weird is set fast.
Okay, so where do we see Christianity and paganism bumping up against each other here right away?
The beginning and the end of the paragraph.
Yeah. Who liveth alone longeth for mercy, maker's mercy. So clear reference to the Christian God, right? But can he get that mercy at the end of the stanza? Because weird is set fast, right? What else do you notice about the way this is structured? Do you notice anything about the way sound repeats in these lines? Do we see rhyme in any of these poems?
No.
What do we see instead? Who liveth alone longeth for mercy, maker's mercy, though he must traverse tracts of sea, sick at heart.
It's alliteration.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, concepts are connected not here by rhyme, but by alliteration. This is partly due to the fact that it is ridiculously fucking hard to rhyme in Anglo-Saxon. If you look at languages where rhyme is common in writing, like not just poetry, but in all forms of writing, you look at, languages that are derived from Latin. It's because they have very regular word endings to indicate parts of speech and things like that, that makes it quite easy to form rhymes. Anglo-Saxon doesn't have anything like that. Anglo-Saxon does not have those kinds of regular conjugations or word endings or that sort of thing, right? So what they do instead in poetry is connect words by alliteration. So the way it typically works, right, the way an alliterative line usually works is you don't have a fixed number of syllables in the line, but you have a fixed number of stresses in each line.
And I think it was 3 every half line.
It's 3 every line, actually, usually. You have to have 3 every line, 2 in the first half of the line, and 1 in the second half of the line. So it falls like this. And the alliterative words are supposed to fall on the stresses, right? Now, like rhyme, this probably originated as a mnemonic device, when this was still oral poetry, and these guys are, they're not writing this down, they're just trying to remember as best they can, using rhythm and repeated sounds to memorize the poem. Thus spoke such a grasshopper, old griefs in his mind, cold slaughters, the death of dear kinsmen. Alone am I driven each day before daybreak to give my cares utterance. None are there now who among the living to whom I declare me throughly, tell my heart's thought. Too truly I know it is in a man no mean virtue that he keep close his heart's chest, hold his thought hoard, think as he may. So this is another thing I want to point out, just a kind of general feature of Anglo-Saxon verse. You're going to notice this a lot in Beowulf. The Anglo-Saxons were fond of these compound metaphors that they called kennings. So in this case, we have heart's chest, which is meant to describe your feelings. Right? Your feelings are like a box that you keep closed, which you keep treasured, right? Your thought hoard refers to your memories, right? And chest and hoard both refer to wealth and storage, right? So these are places where you hold on to what is yours, to your wealth, right? And there's no one you can trust, he says here, with these things, right? That it is a virtue when you are alone, when you are a reka, or exile, you have to keep these things to yourself, right? Show them to no one. No weary mind may stand against weird, nor may a wrecked will work new hope. Wherefore, most often, those eager for fame bind the dark mood fast in their breasts. So must I also curb my mind, cut off from country, from kind far distant, by cares overworn, bind it in fetters. This since long ago the ground's shroud enwrapped my gold friend. Wretched I went thence, winter wearied, over the waves bound. Dreary I sought hall of a gold giver, where near or far I might find him who in mead hall might take heed of me, furnish comfort to a man friendless, win me with cheer. Now there are a couple more of these kennings here that pop up in this. Can you identify a couple more kennings?
Gold friend?
Okay, yeah, gold friend.
Gold giver.
Yep. Pardon?
Gold giver.
Gold friend and gold giver, yeah.
Where is this?
Waves bound?
Waves down. Winter wearied.
Winter wearied, not so much. What was the other one that you mentioned?
Bound.
Waves bound.
Waves bound. Over the waves bound. Well, that's also really not so much a metaphor either, as it is. It's just it's over the boundary of the waves, right?
Oh.
What do we think gold friend and gold giver mean?
The Lord?
Yeah, absolutely, right? That one's easy, right? What about ground's shroud?
A grave?
Yeah. Right. The ground covers you over like a cloth, right? And again, like we have these references in these kennings to wealth. So what he's complaining about here is his inability to find a new lord after the death of his previous lord, right? Now, winter wearied isn't necessarily a kenning, but I think it is an important part of the overall imagery and the texture of the poem, right? We have a lot of references throughout the poem to winter, to cold, to frost. Why do you think that is, given the content here?
Because his whole demeanor is cold now. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really... He looks, but he can't find any new lord, any new kinship with anyone. So
Yeah.
he's just alone and wouldn't really care.
He doesn't have the comforts of the mead hall to keep him protected from the winter.
Yeah, that's the other problem here too. Like, you know, he's alone and he's homeless, right? Right, nothing to protect him from the cold. So it's referring to that kind of inside-outside dichotomy here in two ways. Both culturally, in that he has no community, and because he's a cultural outsider, he also is left physically outside. So the winter is something to which he is specifically vulnerable. He knows who makes trial how harsh and bitter is care for companion, to him who hath few friends to shield him. Track ever taketh him, never the torqued gold, not earthly glory, but cold heart's cave. He minds him of hall men, of treasure giving, how in his youth his gold friend gave him to feast. Fallen all this joy. So this refers back to this common element of the elegy, right? Thinking back on a better past. Comparing it with an unsatisfactory present. He knows this who is forced to forgo his lords, his friends' counsels, to lack them for long. Oft sorrow and sleep, banded together, come to bind the lone outcast. He thinks in his heart then that he, his lord, claspeth and kisseth, and on knee layeth hand and head, as he had at other whiles in days now gone, when he had enjoyed the gift stool. Now here's an interesting metaphor here. All sorrow and sleep banded together come to bind the lone outcast. What are sorrow and sleep being described as here? If they come to bind him. What's that?
Fetters.
Well, fetters are what you bind someone in, right?
Hold them together. I mean, he's remembering what it was like when he was younger. He remembers his lord, his friend's counsel, and then now he's realized he's gone without them so long.
Yeah.
The memory is probably just what's keeping him going.
But it's also bringing him pain, right?
Yeah.
So sorrow and sleep banded together come to bind the lone outcast. What sort of people would come to bind you? Or what sort of things would come to bind you?
They're trying to keep you from doing something. Whatever would bind you.
I think that, Ashlyn was on the right track when she talked about fetters. What sort of people would come to bind you in fetters?
Lawmen.
Okay, yeah, maybe lawmen, right? Certainly, maybe kidnappers, right? It's almost like you get shanghaied by sorrow and sleep, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, they're kidnappers or jailers. That lead him to dream of what he used to have, and then awakeneth after this friendless man, seeth before him fallow waves, seabirds bathing, brooding out feathers, snow and hail swirl, hoarfrost falling. Then all the heavier his heart's wounds, sore for his loved lord, sorrow freshens. So he sleeps, and he remembers all this great stuff, and then he wakes up, and there's the frozen ocean again, right? There's the cold sea, the hail, the snow, with nothing but the seabirds for company, right? Remembered kinsmen press through his mind. He singeth out gladly, scanneth eagerly men from the same hearth. They swim away. Sailors' ghosts bring not many known songs there. Care grows fresh in him who shall send forth too often over locked waves his weary spirit. Therefore I may not think throughout this world, why cloud cometh not on my mind, when I think over all the life of earls, how to stroke they have given up hall, mood-proud thanes. So this middle earth, each of all days, ageth and falleth. So here we have another holdover from pagan cosmology, this idea of Middle Earth or Midgard in Anglo-Saxon, Midgard in Old Norse. How much do either of you know about Norse mythology?
Good bit.
Good bit? Okay, so what is Midgard?
It's where humans live.
Yep.
Yeah, it's right in the middle of the world tree, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, literally Middle Earth, right? You've got Asgard, where the gods live, Vanaheim, where the other gods live, Alfheim, where the elves of light live, Svartalfheim, where the dwarves live, Muspelheim, where the fire spirits live, Jotunheim, where the ice giants live. Like all these different branches coming off, right? And Hell at the roots, where the spirits of the unheroic dead go, right? But yeah, Midgard is, like this particular name for Earth, this Middle Earth, is associated with this pagan cosmology where everything is organized around this tree of life. Right in the middle of the world tree. Wherefore no man grows wise without he have his share of winters. A wise man holds out. He is not too hard-hearted, nor too hasty in speech, nor too weak a warrior, nor wanting in forethought, nor too greedy of goods, nor too glad, nor too mild, nor ever too eager to boast, ere he knows all. A man should forbear boast-making until his mind fully knows which way his spleen shall expend itself. So, let's think about this as indicative of social values here, especially when we think back to the bits about the heart's chest and the thought hoard near the beginning of the poem. What is this suggesting about Anglo-Saxon cultural values? What constitutes wisdom in this case?
The one who doesn't waste their time boasting?
Yeah. So not boasting, at least not boasting until your fierce mind fully knows which way your spleen shall expend itself, right?
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
Not being greedy and not being hot-hearted.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot of what's being warned against here is excess, right?
Don't be greedy.
Yeah, excess greed, excess expression of emotion, right?
Or maybe when it says, so when I read, he is not too hot-hearted, I read, because we said, heart's chest is feelings, not too hot-hearted. Don't go for those heated emotions like anger.
Yep.
Anger and aggression, especially towards your fellow man.
Yeah, play your cards close to the vest, right? Keep your heart's chest and your thought hoard closed, especially to those who don't know you. And yeah, I think that this idea of greed for gold, right? If you're not too greedy of goods, then you won't miss them as much when they're gone, right? When you don't have them any longer. So, yeah, what we're talking about here is the cultural importance of temperance and caution, right? Not in battle so much as in your social dealings. A wise man may grasp how ghastly it shall be when all this world's wealth standeth waste, even as now in many places over the earth walls stand, wind-beaten, hung with hoarfrost, ruined habitations. The wine halls crumble, their wielders lie bereft of bliss, the band all fallen proud by the wall. War took off some, carried them on their high course hence. One a bird bore over the high sea, one the hoar wolf dealt to death, one his drear-cheeked earl stretched in an earthen trench. Cheery, right?
Yeah. You see all kinds of warms and fuzzies.
What's the point being made here?
That the wise man, he understands the weird.
Yeah.
He understands that at the end of the day, win, lose, or draw, whatever's going to happen is going to happen.
Yeah.
And appreciate the now.
And remember what we said also about Germanic beliefs about stability and about the end of the world. What belief was held in common amongst Germanic pagan cultures about what was eventually going to happen to the world?
Ragnarok.
Yeah. Eventually it's all going to end, right? There is no permanence, there is no stability, there is no eternity. Life is a holding action against these forces of entropy and decay, where you just do the best you can and hold them off for as long as you can. But one day, everything is going to fall apart. And then things get weird again, right? And not this weird, like weird, strange, right? The maker of men hath so marred this dwelling that human laughter is not heard about it, and idle stand these old giant works. So does this sound like a God of salvation here when he refers to the maker of men?
He sounds, what's the word? No, spiteful.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, destructive, right? Yeah, so here, the maker, the Christian God is represented as a force just as destructive as every other, right? The maker of men hath so marred this dwelling. So he's creator and destroyer all in one here, right? He made men, but destroyed the world they live in. A man who on these walls wisely looked, who sounded deeply this dark life, would think back to the blood spilt here, weighed in his wit. His word would be this: where is that horse now? Where are those men? Where is the hoard sharer? Where is the house of the feast? Where is the hall's uproar? Alas, bright cup! Alas, burnished fighter! Alas, proud prince! How that time has passed, dark under night's helm, as though it never had been. You're going to want to put a star next to this passage, because you are going to see this echoed almost directly in the Two Towers. When Aragorn quotes a Rohirric poem about their first king, Ural the Young. It's almost word for word what is here in this old Anglo-Saxon poem. There stands in the stead of staunch thanes a towering wall wrought with worm shapes. The earls are oft taken by the ash spear's point, that thirsty weapon. Their weird is glorious. Right? Standing against chaos is honorable even if you fail. Storms break on the stone hillside, the ground bound by driving sleet, winter's wrath. Then wanness cometh, night's shade spreadeth, sendeth from north the rough hail to harry mankind. In the earth realm all is crossed. Weird's will changeth the world. Wealth is lent us, friends are lent us, man is lent, kin is lent. All this earth's frame shall stand empty. So what's the word that keeps repeating throughout this last little verse, this next to last little verse paragraph here? Lent. Yeah. Why do you think that is? What's going on here?
I'm saying nothing lasts forever.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing lasts forever, so make the most of it.
Sure.
Appreciate it while it lasts.
Uh-huh. And if it's lent to us,
it will be taken away.
Yeah, because we don't really own it, right? You don't own wealth, you don't own your friends, you don't own your life, you don't own your kin, right? It's all lent to you for a short space of time. And, much as the library is always bugging me to bring things back when I keep them for too long, Weird is going to take back from you everything you've been given. So spoke the sage in his heart. He sat apart and thought. Good is he who keeps faith, nor should care too fast be out of a man's breast before he know the cure. A warrior fights on bravely. Well is it for him who seeks forgiveness, the Heavenly Father's solace, in whom all our fastness stands. Now let's look in particular at this last sentence.
It's a little shoehorned in.
Yeah, how well does it square with the rest of the poem?
It doesn't.
Yeah, why not? What's wrong with this when we relate it back to the rest?
Because the Christian monk who was translating this wanted to push his religion, but he didn't know how to do it correctly.
It doesn't have the stresses that the rest of the poem has. It's very smooth and trying to wrap it all up in a nice, pretty bow.
Yeah. Well, and what's the suggestion here about the Heavenly Father's solace?
There's no Heavenly Father's solace. It's just the end.
Yeah, I mean, at least earlier in the poem, God is as big a jerk as anybody else, right? Doesn't protect you or anything.
Oh, don't worry about faith. Here, you'll be in the Heavenly Father's solace.
Yeah. But the rest of the body of the poem, right, is telling you there is no solace, right? That everything is transitory, everything changes. You're going to lose everything. and there's nothing you can do about it. At the end, you're just going to be out cold, alone, and homeless in the winter on the sea, and then you'll die. So, yeah, it's clear that the end of the poem is a later interpolation, right? And we see a lot of this in Anglo-Saxon poetry. We see a lot of what looks like, monks and priests who valued the old literature, but couldn't square it with the new belief system. And so they make these kinds of edits to it that try to bring it into line with their belief. Now, there's another school of thought on this sort of thing which suggests that actually these are not interpolations into the poem or the poems, that they're written by conflicted individuals who are trying within themselves to square these older pagan beliefs with new Christian beliefs. Either way, what's important about this is the tension between the two ideas, right? Especially for our purposes, given that we're going to be looking at a long prose epic written by a devoutly Catholic author who seems to have a lot of nostalgia for, and whose primary scholarly interest is in, the Germanic pagan world. So this is the same kind of tension that's going to play out in The Lord of the Rings. So let's shift. Do you guys have anything you want to say? Do you guys have anything further? Do you have questions about this poem or anything you want to say about the Seafarer? The imagery in the Seafarer is quite similar, right? But there are a couple of things I quickly want to point out. Again, we have the sea as a metaphor for exile. We have winter as the metaphor for being alone and homeless. But there are a couple of quick images that I want to point out. One is this notion of hail as being almost like a seed. Or if we look at page 52, 53. This he little believes, his life is run sweet in the burrows, no banished man, but well seen at wine round, my weariness of mind on the way stretching over the salt plains. Night thickened, and from the north snowflakes, hail fell on the frost-bound earth, coldest of grains. This idea of hail as being almost like seeds falling to earth, right? But what springs from those seeds is cold, barren winter exile. Also, the image of the cuckoo, further down page 53, right? The thriving of the tree land, the town's briskness, a lightness over the leaves, life gathering, everything urges the eagerly mooted man to venture on the voyage he thinks of, the faring over flood, the far burn, and the cuckoo calls him in his care-laden voice, scout of summer, sings of new griefs that shall make breast hoard bitter. Why is the cuckoo a fit metaphor for the Reka or exile?
The cuckoo
It's annoying, isn't it?
is abandoned they're put in another bird's nest.
Yeah, cuckoos don't build nests, right?
No.
They lay their eggs in the nests of other birds. In fact, one of the riddles, right? The answer is a cuckoo. If we go to page what?
It's riddle number 9.
Number 9, yes. Abandoned unborn by my begetters, I was still dead a few spring days ago. No beat in the breast, no breath in me. A kinswoman covered me in the clothes she wore. No kind but kind indeed. I was coddled and swaddled as close as I had been a baby of her own, until, as had been shaped, so shielded though no kin, the unguessed guest grew great with life. She fended for me, fostered me, she fed me up, till I was of a size to set my bounds further afield. She had fewer dear sons and daughters because she did so.
Push the other eggs out.
Yeah, that's what a cuckoo does, right? So the abandoned unborn, still dead a few spring days ago, refers to the egg, right? And the other, the kinswoman, that no kind, right? She's not my family, but kind indeed. She took care of me. I was coddled and swaddled as close as I'd been a baby of her own. And because she took care of me,
She was unable to take care of the
yeah,
others.
I repaid her by pushing the others out of the nest, right? Her own actual children. So, yeah, cuckoos are parasites and they're jerks, right? But the idea here, right, the cuckoo being like the exile, right, is that they're both essentially homeless. And they're both suspects. Now, is there anything else that we really need to say about the Seafarer, which otherwise, otherwise it follows the same basic pattern. On page 54, we have another one of those stanzas that places pagan and Christian ideas in tension, right? I do not believe earthly estate is everlasting. 3 things always threaten a man's peace, and one before the end shall overthrow his mind. Either illness or age or the edge of vengeance shall draw out the breath from the doom-shadowed. Wherefore, for earl whosoever it is afterward, the praise of livers on that lasting is best. 1, in the world before wayfaring, forged, framed here in the face of enmity in the devil's spite, deeds, achievements, that after speakers should respect the name, and after them angels have honor toward it for always and ever. From those everlasting joys the daring shall not die. So, what is the speaker here suggesting breeds immortality? Where does immortality come from?
From those everlasting joys the daring shall not die.
Yeah, from the great deeds you do that are remembered, right? This is a very pagan idea, right? The notion, this is something that stretches back, to ancient Mesopotamia, right? The notion that the afterlife basically sucks for everybody, right? You're just, a bunch of, ghostly shades flitting about with no memory of the world above. Where your real immortality lies is on earth with people who remember you. So you should be familiar with the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? You must. Are you familiar with Gilgamesh?
I have not read it.
Okay, so the basic idea, so Gilgamesh goes out on a quest for physical immortality because he gets so upset watching his friend die, and the process of decay upsets him so much. He's like, that's going to happen to me too. So he tries to find a way to become physically immortal himself. And at the end of the poem, when he's lost his chance at real immortality, or like godly immortality, he comes back to his city and he looks upon the walls that he built to protect it and realizes that that is where his immortality lies, right? In the thing that he did for his people for which he will be remembered. We see the same idea expressed here, right? Although it's mixed here with Christian ideology in that these deeds are done in the devil's spite, right? So even when you're spiting the devil, you're still fighting not to get into heaven, but to have people remember you on earth. And then we have this prose paragraph at the end, right? Which it's not even entirely clear that this is, because of the way these codexes are set up, it's not entirely clear whether this is really part of the poem or not, right? This prose paragraph that's listed as being lines 103 to 24. it seems to be almost more like a commentary on the poem than a part of the poem itself. But it's weird in that it's still kind of mixes some of these ideas together, right? Great is the terrible power of God before which the earth shall turn aside. He established the firm foundations, the expanse of the earth, the heavens above. This is a fairly common Anglo-Saxon way of talking about God. They tend to describe him as an architect or house builder, almost like a lord who builds a meat hall. Foolish is the man who does not fear his Lord. Death shall come upon him unprepared. Blessed is the man who lives in trust. Grace shall come to him from the heavens. The Lord shall confirm that spirit in him, for he believes in his might. A man should manage a headstrong spirit and keep it in its place, and be true to men, fair in his dealings. He should treat every man with measure, restrain enmity towards friend and foe. He may not wish his cherished friend to be given over to the fire, nor to be burnt on the pyre, yet doom is stronger, and God is mightier than any man's conception. So doom is another way of saying weird. Right here we don't mean doom necessarily in the sense of negative fate, right? We mean doom in the sense of fate, period, right? This, by the way, is also the, this is the way Tolkien tends to use the word doom as well, right? He tends to use doom as a reference to fate rather than, spooky doom. I think I've made my point with this overall. Again, I want to take a quick look at the riddles before we go, but do you guys have any further questions about these two poems? Or anything else you want to say about them? Okay, yeah, I think we get a pretty good, solid expression of the Anglo-Saxon worldview and some of the cultural tensions within it from these poems, which is one of the reasons I like to start with them. Plus, they're brief, right?
It's funny that, you're saying in this passage that, God is, an architect, a builder, he builds a hall.
Uh-huh.
And, when you said that, I thought, back to, I can't remember the quote, but it's, you go to the house of the Lord where he has prepared a table for me,
Mm-hmm.
and connect that back to that. I mean, that's what the Lord did back then.
Yeah.
He prepared a hall and he prepared a table for me.
Exactly, yeah. So what was happening here, the reason they do that is because Christian missionaries, at least to some extent, understood the audience to whom they were talking, and they realized that they had to frame the idea of God that they were presenting in language and in imagery that their hearers were going to understand and identify with. So, yeah, they describe God in terms of a Lord who builds a mead hall. Heaven is like that mead hall. And they describe, in particular, there's a poem called The Dream of the Rood, in which the cross, it's a vision poem in which the cross speaks to the poet. And in that poem, Christ is described as being like a warrior who dies for his war band. So, to us, it's a strange image. And it's one that probably would have been strange to early Christians in the Middle East as well. But it was a way that early missionaries to Scandinavia and to the British Isles were able to frame their ideas within the cultural reference points of Germanic peoples. That's right. Okay, this is what you guys value. Okay, this is how we're gonna describe this to you, right?
So to relate it to their world, they would say that God is like their Lord, their...
Yeah, he's their Laford, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I think, hence, the English tendency to refer to God as well as the Lord, right? Which is something that is, I don't know how common that is in other languages, but it seems to me like that's perhaps connected in some way. Okay. Let's see. Are there any of the riddles in particular that you guys wanted to talk about? Any that really surprised you or confused you?
Number 38.
Number 38, okay.
Mainly because I don't know what a bullock is.
Okay. A bullock is just take the OCK off of it. Yeah, so it's a bullock, yep. Yeah, I watched a beast of the weapon sex. He forced, fired by the first of lusts, 4 fountains which refreshed his youth, to shoot out shining in their shaped ways. A man stood by that said to me, that beast living will break clods, torn to tatters will tie men's hands. So what is the beast doing in the first stanza?
Is he mating with another cow? Or...
He is doing that and also plowing a field. That beast living will break clods, right? That beast living, you hook him up to a plow, he'll plow your field. Torn to tatters, he'll tie men's hands, right? So when he's dead and you make leather out of his skin, right? You can make fetters to bind people, right? And there are a lot of these riddles that refer to animals that talk about them in terms of parts that are made from their dead bodies, right? Let's look at, we're running out of time here since we started early, but let's look at number 26 here. I am the scalp of myself, skinned by my foeman. Robbed of my strength, he steeped me and soaked me, dipped me in water, whipped me out again, set me in the sun. I soon lost there the hairs I had had. The hard edge of a keen-ground knife cuts me now, fingers fold me, and a fowl's pride drives its treasure trail across me, bounds again over the brown rim, sucks the wood dye, steps again on me, makes his black marks. A man then hides me between stout shield boards stretched with hide, fits me with gold. There glows on me the jewelsmith's handiwork held with wires. So can we see in these 3 stanzas here what's going on here? What process is being described?
Bookmaking. Yeah,
it's the process of bookmaking. Yeah. You kill an animal, you take its skin, soak it, tan it, then make sure that you shave it down, scrape it down. You bind it with hide, fit it with gold. The fowl's pride is a quill pen, right? Driving its treasure trail across me, the expensive ink. And it's fitted together with wires by the jewelsmith, right? And it's ornamented, it's decorated. So it's the production of a book. Okay, so we're about out of time, again, given that we started a little bit early. Do you guys have any questions about anything at all? Okay, so we're going to start on Beowulf next time. I have some guide questions for you. And for next time, you're going to be reading a little over half the poem. And then we'll be focusing on Beowulf's battle with the dragon next week. And I suppose I should probably turn this on.